Hi, I'm Catherine, a licensed therapist and a virtual coach, and today I'm answering questions that were previously sent in by you guys. Before I jump in, make sure that you subscribe and like this video so that you can make sure and stay up to date in all of the new videos that are going to come out. Today, I'm tackling specifically a question that comes up a lot with couples that I've worked with, and this question has to do with when you feel defensive from something that your spouse says, and then a lot of times the conversation gets derailed. So the exact question that was sent in is, how can I avoid getting defensive or feeling like everything I'm doing is wrong? So first, let's talk about why we get defensive in the first place. A lot of this takes place without us even realizing it, something that happens in our brain to try and protect us. Maybe we get triggered or something is said that really doesn't sit right with us, and there's this immediate need to be defensive, to prove our point, to say why we're right or whatever. And all of this happens within a millisecond of each other, of course. So basically just your brain's way of trying to protect you emotionally from something that feels like a threat. And then of course, rarely does defensiveness ever produce a good thing in a conversation. It usually produces something negative. So we want to talk about how to lower that so that you can actually have productive conversations with your spouse. The first step in all of this is to create awareness within yourself as to why you specifically might be feeling defensive, because everybody's experience is different, and your own past experiences or possibly traumas contribute to that. So it's really important to build self-awareness and figure out, why do you specifically feel defensive? Here's 3 questions that you can use to ask yourself to help build that self-awareness. The first one is, do I feel attacked even if the other person is just expressing their needs? The second one, do I immediately start justifying my actions versus listening? And then the third one is, do I feel like I have to prove that I'm a good partner, spouse, friend, wife, whatever? Because yes, we're talking about this in the nature of a married relationship, but this also can go towards any kind of relationship. When it comes to communicating defensiveness, it's important to figure out what is happening inside of me and why do I feel the need to react this way. So those 3 questions are really helpful, and I would encourage you to get curious about that and try and see if you can notice any kind of pattern or things that would contribute to that inside of you. Once you're able to identify some of the reasons as to why you might be getting defensive based on those questions, you can pause and start practicing reframing your response. Something else that's really helpful too is to keep in mind that feedback does not have to equal something negative about who you are as a person. If that is something that you're feeling, that if someone brings constructive feedback to you, or hey, we need to work on this or whatever, and you start taking it really personally, that means that there's some things about your belief system, about who you are, that really need to be addressed for you to be able to hear something that might be coming off as neutral, or is supposed to come off as neutral, but you're hearing that as negative, so that you can be able to reframe the way that you're hearing what is said to you. So instead of hearing feedback as an attack, see it as just an opportunity for growth. Instead of your brain maybe jumping to, they're saying that everything I do is wrong, try reframing it to, they're expressing something that's important to them, because that also makes a really big difference on how you might see that situation. A really helpful phrase that I would challenge you to practice implementing is, this is about the situation, not my worth. Because again, sometimes we tie what's being mentioned or what has happened to our identity and who we are, and that does not, we don't have to connect those dots necessarily. And something else to consider is it doesn't have to mean so much. So if something feels like it's the end of the world, you decide how much value to assign to that thing, which will then contribute if you're going to get defensive or not. So it's really helpful if you can try and just almost make it seem a little bit less intense. It doesn't have to mean so much. So a specific example could be if your spouse brings up something I really feel like I'm doing more of the housework lately, I feel like things are a little bit imbalanced, instead of immediately getting defensive and saying, that's not true, I do a lot too, which, okay, might be valid. You probably both do a lot, but in that moment, that defensive response is not helpful. And so that would be something that needs to be kind of talked about after addressing what they have just brought up. So if they bring up to you that they feel like there's an imbalance in the amount of work between the two of you, then you can say I really appreciate you bringing that up to me. let's brainstorm how we can make it feel more fair, or like how we can work this out, because I don't want you to feel like that. I don't want to feel like that. So like, what can we do to make that better? And like, let's say you have that conversation, you come to the same conclusion, you're more on the same page, and you still feel that like urge that like, well, I do a lot of stuff too. Talk about it. So you could even say like, I really wanted to say that, and I'm trying to not be defensive and just like really hear you out, but I still felt like you were saying I don't do a lot. And that might be an opportunity for you guys to open up and dialogue about like, oh no, like I wasn't saying you don't do a lot. Like I know you do. You have a lot on your plate with, you know, being a mom and your business and etc. So it's just like this part of the housework that really has felt imbalanced to me. And that's why I wanted to bring it up. So it's really the way that you would bring up those concerns is important, because if you bring up that concern in a defensive manner, it's not really going to get heard the way that it needs to. And then you're not going to be able to like get the response that's helpful for you, versus if you focus on the initial thing that was brought up and then talk about that like concern that got brought up or was triggered after the fact, then you kind of both get a win-win in terms of the point of bringing up both of the things that are important to you. Here's a couple other examples that you can use that create openness versus being defensive. You could say something like, oh, that's really interesting. Can you tell me more about what you're thinking with that? Or I see what you're saying. Let's think about, brainstorm how we can make this better. Or I really don't understand, but I'm trying to, can you explain a little bit more? Things like that keep the conversation lines open versus shutting it down, which is what happens when there's defensiveness. It's also really important to have self-compassion. As you are retraining your brain and practicing this skill, it's not going to happen overnight. So give yourself a lot of grace as you're working towards lowering that defensive response. And if you mess up, you can own that up and own it in that instance. And you can say something like, okay, I totally just messed up. I got defensive. I wasn't trying to. I'm sorry. Can we just backtrack for a second? So that's really important to create this understanding between the both of you that, yeah, you're human, you're gonna mess up, but you're still working towards growth in this area. So just to summarize a little bit, if you feel like you're getting defensive a lot and you're recognizing that it's not a healthy way of communicating and you're trying to break that habit, change the cycle, change the pattern, get curious with yourself. What are the things that set you off, trigger you? Why is that the case? And what kind of inner work might need to be done so that there's healing internally, so you can hear what they have to say without feeling that response come up inside of you. Give yourself lots of grace and practice as you're practicing, because it's going to take time and you're not going to get it right 100% of the time, and that's okay too. If this resonates with you, I invite you to check out the Relationship Renewal Program. This is my signature program that includes my online course, so a whole amount of video modules, a workbook, and then live group coaching calls with me, where we talk through all kinds of things in terms of individual work that has to be done, the triggers, breaking those cycles that are not helpful in communicating, and then dialoguing about what has happened week to week, things that maybe you've been working through the modules and you're a little bit stuck, and we can just work together so that your communication is in a really better place, so that you create a new healthy cycle where defensiveness is a thing of the past, because that is totally possible and something that I want for you. If this was helpful, please let me know in the comments. Please add any other questions or concerns that you have. I would really love to hear from you. Make sure that you like this video and don't forget to subscribe so that you can have more tips on communicating and healthy relationships. I will see you in the next video.